A 1980s born entrepreneur running a kitchenware factory in Zhejiang named Lao Guo has recently been overwhelmed by the piles of goods stacking up in his warehouse. In a video he posted, Lao Guo expressed his frustration, saying that US tariffs have shattered his dreams as a middle aged man striving for success. He shared, "So many goods are stuck due to tariff issues, and I don't know where they will go." Lao Guo's factory employs over 60 workers and specializes in producing kitchenware products like cake molds, primarily exporting to Europe and the US. Not long ago, Lao Guo placed two white marble lions at the entrance of his factory, hoping they would bring prosperity. He even proudly declared, "If you work hard, the world will not disappoint you." But reality has been harsh on him, and he reflects the sentiment of many Chinese entrepreneurs. The more ambitious you are, the more you lose. Since the beginning of 2025, Lao Guo has faced heavy blows from US tariffs. In early March, the US raised tariffs by 20% in response to the fentanyl issue, causing a slowdown in his sales. On April 2nd, President Trump announced an additional 34% tariff, which was a devastating strike for his factory. Lao Guo is uncertain about what the future holds, fearing he might face bankruptcy or closure. Lao Guo's struggles have sparked widespread discussions and sympathy on social media, with people sharing their thoughts in the comments. Some expressed their frustration with the situation, while others offered advice, but the overall mood reflects a deep sense of pessimism and helplessness. This may be the most honest reflection of China's public sentiment regarding the US high tariffs. Suggestions to turn the domestic sales have appeared, with some people believing that China's 1.4 billion people offer a massive market potential. But others quickly countered, saying, "If no one is buying, how can we sell domestically?" Others are laying off workers because they can't export, so how can they afford to buy? The country is still here, but some people may have lost their homes. Others argue domestic demand is weak. External trade accounts for about 30 to 40% of our economy, meaning 30% of people depend directly or indirectly on foreign trade for their livelihood. When the second industry collapses, the third industry will follow suit. There are also comments pointing out that the tens of millions of workers producing goods have no choice but to rely on exports, as the domestic market has long been saturated. Without exporting products, they would struggle to afford essential resources like oil, soybeans, corn, potassium fertilizers, and coal for electricity. One comment suggested raising prices, arguing that if tariffs increase, products prices will go up and the burden will eventually fall on Americans. This idea was met with skepticism, as customers can always choose not to buy. An industry insider responded, saying, "Do you think the final tax burden falls on the American people? How naive. In the end, it's domestic workers who suffer and subsidize taxes to keep selling to Americans, or else the US market is lost." Other suggestions, such as selling to the EU, Russia, or shifting production to Vietnam, were quickly dismissed as unrealistic. One commentator noted customers are not that easy to find. Vietnam's tariffs are even higher, and re export trade is blocked. Some pointed out that they have been trying to shift and develop new customers for 2 years, but with limited success despite investing millions. Many expressed concerns that China's foreign trade industry is now in a dire situation, with one comment saying, "It is like the gods are fighting and the common people are suffering." Another said, "It's always been a fierce competition, but now the backlash is here." One comment mentioned many factories in Guangdong have closed, adding that orders will stop after June and over 300 people will lose their jobs, most of them middle-aged workers with families. Another factory owner complained, "The apparel industry is also struggling with tariffs this year," while another stated, "We've always wanted to enter the US market, but now we've completely given up. The whole world criticizes the US, but no one wants to give up on the US market." Some expressed hope that things would eventually get better, saying, "It's tough now, but we'll get through it. Stay strong." But many remain pessimistic, with some saying, "We won't make it through this time. This is different." A few even compare the situation to the pandemic, arguing that it is worse, saying 3 years of face masks, interest rate hikes and cuts, and now tariffs. Our hope is slowly fading and we can't take it anymore. Lao Guo's predicament is far from an isolated case, and similar cases may only intensify in the future. On April 2nd, the Trump administration announced a 34% tariff on Chinese imports, adding to the 20% tariff already imposed earlier this year. In total, Chinese products now face an additional 54% tariff from the US. In 2025, If we include the tariffs imposed during Trump's first term in the US-China trade war, the total tariff rate on Chinese goods could rise to a minimum of 65%. For China's foreign trade businesses, this is not just about fewer orders. It is a survival crisis, potentially leading to a chain reaction that could collapse the entire foreign trade industry. An employee of a foreign trade company in Shenzhen has recently revealed in an interview with the international media that the new US tariff policy will severely impact the company's export to the US. The company has no effective countermeasures at the moment. If profits decline, the burden will ultimately fall on customers. He said, when customers ask for price cuts, we do make concessions if possible, but the factory cannot afford to operate at a loss. If it becomes unmanageable, we will have to reduce orders from the US market, and there's no other solution. The situation is even more dire, as a global tariff introduced by Trump is not only targeting China but also imposing heavy tariffs on several other manufacturing countries. Cambodia faces a 49% tariff, Laos 47%, Vietnam 46%, and countries like Thailand and Indonesia are also affected with tariffs exceeding 30%. These countries have become popular destinations for Chinese companies moving their factories to avoid tariffs. However, the reality is harsh as these countries now face even higher tariffs. A Chinese business owner with a factory in Vietnam lamented, "I woke up and it feels like the sky is falling." The TikTok account, a Hey Livsing, posted a video saying, "Last year I sold everything and took out loans worth over 100,000 to open a factory in Vietnam. Today tariffs have increased so much and it's a total collapse. I'm now preparing to go to Russia to join the army and pay off my debts." The TikToker shares his experience. He is a 26-year-old and quit his job in 2024, sold everything and took out loans to open a silk screen printing factory in Hai Yang City, Vietnam, specializing in post-processing for footwear products with high hopes of making a fortune. However, the sharp rise in tariffs had led to a collapse of his business. Many small and medium-sized businesses owners like Ahoy Livshing bet everything on overseas factories, hoping to turn things around, but they found themselves in an even deeper crisis. Similarly, Miss Lee, a trade business owner in Guangdong who specializes in electronics exports to the US, told Radio Free Asia on April 4th that the new US tariff have left people in the industry struggling. She mentioned that US buyers are now requiring that prices include tariffs, with Chinese exporters bearing the cost of import duties, which significantly reduces profit margins. Another Chinese businessman, Zhang Shenqi, analyzed the situation for Radio Free Asia, stating that the US now imposes a uniform 46% tariff on products from Vietnam, which is a 12 percentage points higher than the tariff on Chinese products. This move clearly shows that the path of Chinese companies moving factories to Vietnam to avoid tariff has been effectively shut down. The role of Vietnam as an export substitute has been completely invalidated, and the opportunity for re-exporting to avoid taxes has been fully blocked. Chairman of Guangdong Dongguan Guangshen Hardware and Plastic Products Company, Zai Shuoling, also expressed similar concerns in an interview with Lianhe Zhaobao. His company produces toys, primarily for the European and American markets. Previously, a 20% tariff could be shared between the company and the US sales partners, but the new 34% tariff is too much for anyone to bear. Price increases have become inevitable. Zai had planned to relocate the factory to Southeast Asia, but now he has decided to wait and see, saying because no matter where we move, we can't avoid the tariffs. These cases reflect the unprecedented pressure facing Chinese foreign trade companies, whether responding with prices hikes, reducing orders, or moving production bases. The heavy tolls of tariff has made the operations increasingly limited. The impact is particularly severe for many companies involved in cross-border e-commerce. Trump has also signed an executive order to end the tax exemption for small packages worth under $800 from mainland China and Hong Kong, effective May 2nd. For cross-border e-commerce businesses which already operate on razor-thin margin, this new policy will be an unbearable burden, as another content creator mentioned.
The sky is falling for cross-border e-commerce sellers. Once the U.S. Customs raises tariffs, almost all Chinese cross-border e-commerce sellers will lose money. The nuclear war in cross-border e-commerce has begun.
The cross-border logistic industry is also facing severe damage due to the latest round of the US tariff policies. An employee possibly working in cross-border logistics appeared anxious during an interview. He stated with a sense of urgency,
"Today, our company says something about the U.S. raising tariffs again. I see so many companies going out of business, and it looks like ours is heading in the same direction. I saw the boss already, looking really stressed out."
The owner of a foreign trade cloud warehouse, seeing piles of goods, could only lower his head and sigh.
What can you do? The warehouse is so big, and we're going bankrupt. We can't even pay one employee's salary. How are we supposed to keep going this year? We've even taken down the sign.
A previous Nomura study indicated that cross-border small packages account for about 11% of China's exports to the US. In recent years, with the aggressive low-price strategies of companies like Temu and Shein, these e-commerce businesses have already been operating with minimal profits, relying on slim margins to stay afloat. Now, with such high tariffs, e-commerce businesses trading with the US are facing a dead end. Industry insiders have analyzed that during the years of the US-China trade war, the average profit margin for Chinese export companies has usually been in the single digits, with many even falling below 5%. Even if tariffs are typically shared between the exporters and importers, the recent drastic increase in tariffs has effectively wiped out any remaining profits for China's export industry. Also, almost every country around the world now has a 10% base tariff, making it meaningless to reroute goods through other countries to avoid tariffs. Now, Chinese export companies have only one option: find alternative market outside the US. Faced with the situation, the Chinese government has shown no concerns for the difficulties faced by these companies. Instead, it has opted for a direct confrontation with the US, even refusing negotiation opportunities, and has immediately implemented 6 retaliatory measures. On April 4th, the Chinese government officially announced it would implement equal tariffs on the US imports and released an unprecedented list of retaliatory actions. The scope and intensity of these measures was so broad that they were dubbed as 6 arrows. Number 1, tariff equalization. Starting at 12:01 a.m. on April 10th, China will impose an additional 34% tariff on all US imports, aligning with the US tariff policy against China. Number 2, export control list. The Ministry of Commerce announced that 16 US entities will be added to the export control list, banning exports of military and dual-use goods to these companies, including High Point Aviation Technologies and Global World Logistics. 11 US companies, including Skydio, will also be added to the unreliable entity list, banning them from any related imports or export activities in China and restricting new investments in China, effectively halting their operations in the country. Number 3, agricultural product sanctions. The General Administration of Customs suspended one US company's qualification to export sorghum to China, citing inspection and quarantine issues. Also, exports of poultry bone meal from 3 US companies and poultry goods from 2 companies have been suspended. Number 4, rare earth export controls. China imposed export restrictions on 7 categories of heavy and medium rare earth materials, strategically using rare earth as a resource weapon. Number 5, anti-dumping investigation. China launched an anti-dumping investigation on US and Indian-made medical CT tubes. Number 6, anti-monopoly investigation. An anti-monopoly investigation has been launched into US chemical giant DuPont's China's subsidiary. China has also filed a lawsuit against the US at the World Trade Organization dispute settlement body, marking a symbolic conclusion of these measures. This 6-arrow response contrasts sharply with the Chinese government's relatively mild reaction following Trump's imposition of a 10% tariff, showing a more hardline stance. After China announced these so-called countermeasures, Chinese economists shared their views, offering a more sober perspective compared to the more retaliatory stance of government officials. For example, Fu Pen, the chief economist at Northeast Securities, who was previously known for his pessimistic views on China's economy, wrote that in Trump's eyes, trade deficits are like an imbalance between buyers and suppliers. Now, he has gathered global suppliers to start a major negotiation. Tariffs are like the price in a bidding process, and the tariff ceiling is similar to the minimum bid from a company. Once the threshold is set, suppliers who want to participate must negotiate the supply terms with the buyer. Countries will negotiate these terms with the buyer to find a compromise. He said, if you flip the table and refuse to participate in this negotiation, to some extent, it's equivalent to giving up the opportunity to bid. Chairman of Shenzhen Dongfang Port Bay Investment Management, Dan Bing, believes the only buyer in the world is the US, and it has firmly started the process of changing global trade rules. All the suppliers have only one choice: follow in its footsteps. Any supplier who refuses to be excluded from the new rule system and will be doomed, unable to recover. He said a group of suppliers who can only sell goods can never challenge the buyer with money in hand. The funniest thing in the world is when a group of suppliers gather to criticize the buyer for not being ethical, forcing the buyer to buy their products. If these suppliers even create a new set of trade rules and force the buyer to follow them, then that's even funnier. There's no more absurd joke than this. But China is choosing to confront the US directly, according to the industry insiders. About 25% of China's export goods are destined for the US. Finding alternative markets for this quarter of export is a highly challenging task. Trump has responded rapidly to China's countermeasures. He immediately posted on Truth Social warning with one sentence: China played it wrong. They panicked. The one thing they can't afford to do. His words were short but full of intensity, suggesting that the US might take even harsher countermeasures. In contrast to China's hardline response, most other countries have reacted more cautiously to Trump's global tariffs. Countries like Cambodia, Laos, Thailand, and Malaysia have clearly stated they will not retaliate, but will seek solution through existing trade agreements. Overall, these countries may choose to compromise due to their economic dependence on the US. Vietnam, in particular, has proposed measures to have zero tariffs on US imports. On April 4th, after a conversation between Vietnamese General Secretary Nguyen Phu Trong and Trump, the Vietnamese government quickly issued a statement expressing its willingness to reduce tariffs on the US imports to zero. In exchange, Vietnam proposed that the US impose the same tariff rate on Vietnamese products. The statement also mentioned that Vietnam is ready to expand imports from the US, encourage American companies to invest, and ensure favorable conditions. This suggests that Vietnam may avoid the full impact of the tariffs through diplomatic negotiations. Facing the trade war led by Trump, China will undoubtedly be at the center of a fierce global diplomatic battle. Countries may weigh whether to follow suit by imposing tariffs on Chinese products, using closing the door to China as leverage to gain access to US markets. Southeast Asia is likely to become a key area of competition. For example, Vietnam has already announced a 27.83% tariff on Chinese steel, and South Korea has imposed a 38% tariff on Chinese steel. As a result, it is highly likely that China's export industry will face a devastating crisis. Some even say this could lead to a 30-year economic regression for China back to the pre-WTO era. The resulting pressure could quickly affect China's domestic political environment, potentially leading to two extreme paths: either stricter controls and more forceful measures, or the collapse of the current system, resulting in fundamental change. The tariff war is no longer just an economic competition, but a test of strategic will between the two countries. More importantly, for China-US relations, the tariffs are only the beginning. With the loss of economic cooperation, China has chosen to retaliate firmly, moving away from the balanced approach and shifting to full-scale confrontation. This marks a significant policy shift with long-term implications. In the near future, US-owned companies may be removed, US products may exit the Chinese market, and Chinese companies may distance themselves from the US financial system. A series of financial, technological, and geopolitical challenges are expected to follow. For many Chinese businesses, the consequences of this conflict may signal tougher times ahead.